Hey guys, tonight we're stepping past the history books and into a quiet corner of the past. Forget the portraits of the glorious Virgin Queen and the tales of a golden age. We're going to dive into a different kind of story, a collection of 99 disturbing facts about Elizabeth I that historians often choose to whisper rather than shout. This isn't just a list. It's a glimpse into the human side of a legend, a place where power, vanity, and suffering intertwined in a way you've never heard before. So, if you're ready to see beyond the crown, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. It's always a little magical to think about all of us, scattered across the globe, sharing this quiet moment together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. And now, with the deadly makeup stripped away, we no longer see the pure, pearlescent image of the Virgin Queen, but a body poisoned by lead and mercury, blackened, rotting teeth, and wounds covering every inch. Beneath each layer of silk and splendor lie innumerable dark secrets that historians can only whisper about in the royal court. Let us now embark on a journey to uncover 99 horrifying facts about Elizabeth I, and you will not believe how terrifying fact number 56 truly is. Fact number 1. Lethal mask. A peaceful morning in Westminster Hall typically began with the flicker of candles and the soft swish of brushes applying powder. But for Elizabeth I, each dawn was a dark ritual in which she painted her delicate face with a mixture of lead and mercury deadly compounds that seeped into every pore, corroding her skin's structure for 4 decades. Beneath that pure white veneer lay no natural, smooth complexion but an unfeeling shell, blistered and poisoned. Court physicians warned of spreading ulcers and of her hands trembling as she meticulously applied her makeup. Yet she remained enthralled by the ritual, transfixed by her silver mirror, tending every fine stroke, shaking at the slightest touch of anyone near her dressing table. Fact number 2. Choosing to poison herself. It was not mere ignorance Elizabeth knowingly rubbed heavy metals onto her face. John Dee, the court astronomer and medical advisor, presented cases of metal poisoning, showing victims' skin peeling and bodies racked with tremors. Still, she was undeterred. Before significant ceremonies, she increased her dosage, applying the mixture twice daily. She even devised a system of mirrors and candlelight to display only her flawless facade while concealing the necrotic flesh beneath. This was no longer royal pageantry, but a declaration of power built at the expense of her own body. Fact number 3. Peeling veneer. Ambassadors' memoirs recount national banquets that turned into spectacles of horror. White makeup, cracked like dried plaster, flaking off and dropping onto tables, tumbling into wine goblets or mingling with food. What should have been grand occasions became grotesque scenes. Guests flinched as chunks of painted mask plopped onto linen, the crackling sound like a blade cleaving illusion, a stark reminder that underneath lay dead skin and decaying flesh. Fact number 4. Palace of corpse odor. Throughout the vaulted halls and grand chambers, Elizabeth's palace reeked of rot. The tang of metallic mercury mingled with festering wounds and the acrid stench of dried lead, an atmosphere all the stronger for being masked with rosewater and musk. Diplomats admitted that merely crossing the threshold, they inhaled the scent of death, dry, bitter, burning their throats and clouding their minds. Physicians recorded that after audiences, some lay resting for the entire day, plagued by headaches and nausea. Fact number 5. Blackened teeth. And then, amid the splendor of court audiences, she chewed ravenously with a ruined mouth. Addicted to sugar, Elizabeth sampled sweetness with a spoon during serious councils, a habit that completely destroyed her tooth enamel. By the age of 30, only jagged, blackened stumps remained above bleeding gums. The royal dentists urged extraction, but she refused, fearing that losing teeth would weaken her voice and diminish her authority in every stirring address. She chose agonizing pain over any loss of regal presence. Fact number 6. Decay in every crevice. As the evening candles flicker and the last notes of music drift through the hall, Elizabeth retires from the banquet table with an almost serene composure, yet hidden within her mouth are ghastly pockets of decay. Over the years, bits of meat and bread have become wedged in the gaps between her blackened, rotting teeth, creating festering pouches of pus that ooze poison under her tongue. Diplomats and courtiers at state dinners have trembled at the sight of slimy morsels slipping from her maw, plopping onto the linen with sickening thuds. And still, she chews and swallows, as if oblivious to the putrefaction she carries. Whether she truly cannot perceive the horror, or simply chooses to ignore it, her calm persistence in such unhygienic disarray reveals a chilling disconnection from the body she so fiercely commands. Fact number 7. Dental defiance. Despite the agony raging in her jaw, Elizabeth has banned all dental interventions within her court. When royal physicians attempted to extract a shattered tooth with crude iron forceps devoid of any form of anesthesia, she lunged at them with regal fury, fists flailing, terrifying even the most battle-hardened attendants. Driven by a terror that a missing tooth might muffle her voice, tarnish her eloquence, or diminish her aura of unassailable authority, she endures unrelenting torment rather than risk a single gap in her speech. As infections spread from her gums to her cheeks, creating throbbing abscesses and searing pain, she bore it all in stoic silence. A sovereign so proud that even her own comfort was a concession she refused to make. Fact number 8. Drained to the bone. It is said that Elizabeth submitted to bloodletting more than 200 times during her reign. At the slightest headache or general malaise, leeches were affixed to her skin, and lancets sawed through her veins in a crude effort to balance her humours. The practice, often conducted without sterilization or rest between patients, led to festering wounds and chronic anemia that left her pallid, frail, and all too prone to fainting spells. Yet she would rise, insist on court proceedings, and present herself in all her regal finery, her strength sapped, her limbs trembling but never allowing her courtiers to glimpse weakness. Each brittle vein she offered was a silent testament to her unwillingness to admit a need for mercy. Fact number 9. Near fatal cure. At the age of 29, Elizabeth fell gravely ill with what many believed to be smallpox. In desperation, her physicians unleashed their most aggressive remedy, dozens of leeches and multiple incisions to drain tainted blood. The torrent of crimson coursed into bowls at her bedside until her pulse all but vanished, and her courtiers feared they were witnessing her demise. For hours she lay between life and death, a victim not only of disease but of the very treatment meant to save her. Only at the behest of her most trusted advisers did the bleeding finally cease, sparing her life by the narrowest margin, yet teaching her court a grim lesson about the deadly price of misguided medicine. Fact number 10. Veiled verification. In a practice that would be deemed abhorrent by any modern standard, Elizabeth's virginity was enforced through invasive medical examinations. Royal physicians wielded crude metal specula never properly sterilized and probed her most intimate places on a regular basis, at times inclining her to bleed for days afterward. These intrusive inspections, deemed necessary for state security during marriage negotiations, inflicted physical trauma and festering infections. And though the portraits of the Virgin Queen depict her as aloof and pristine, the reality was a sovereign whose sovereignty over her own body had been forfeited, traded for the gilded illusion of purity her reign demanded. Fact number 11. Hidden inability. In the hushed hush of candlelit consultations, court physicians whispered a diagnosis no one dared record publicly. Elizabeth was likely unable to bear children. Hidden deep within her anatomy lay a congenital malformation of her reproductive organs, an abnormality that, once discovered, explained the agonizing pain of her monthly cycles and the terror she felt at the thought of marriage. For the Virgin Queen, each menstrual period became a reminder of a body that betrayed her, throbbing with feverish infection and leaving her incapacitated for days. Far from the glorious image of an eternal matriarch, she was a woman imprisoned by her own physiology, haunted by the knowledge that despite her 45 years, the crown's most sacred duty, providing an heir, was forever beyond her grasp. Fact number 12. Palace of Filth. Beyond the glittering courts and embroidered tapestries, Elizabeth's residences functioned as immense pit latrines. Without any properly engineered sewers, the waste of thousands of nobles, servants and guards accumulated in chilling cellars during winter snows, only to fester and rot when thaw temperatures returned. Corridors echoed with the drip of human refuse sliding down stone walls. Passages grew so foul that foreign nobles begged to conduct their diplomacy under the open sky rather than risk inhaling the stench. No powdered wig or scented veil could fully obscure the reek of corruption. The lingering odor of decay underpinned every splendid ceremony, a grim chorus to courtly life. Fact number 13. Bathing ban. Although personal hygiene had never reached modern standards, Elizabeth's bathing habits were particularly revolting. She would go months without a single scrub, believing that opening her skin's pores with soap and water would invite disease and malevolent spirits. When she deigned to immerse herself, she slid into a wooden tub of reused river water, murky with fragments of straw, bits of cloth, even the occasional insect. Ladies-in-waiting, tears mixed with resigned frustration, would attempt to rinse her limbs with the same sullied water, unable to apply soap for fear of stripping her protective oils. By the end of a single bath, she emerged, cloaked not in cleanliness, but in another layer of grime, the filth melding with old sweat, strengthening the odor that stalked her throughout the palace. Fact number 14. Tortured by nature. For Elizabeth, menstruation was not merely a monthly inconvenience, but a descent into torment. In an era devoid of sanitary products, she relied on strips of cloth washed perfunctorily in cold water and reused until frayed. These makeshift pads brewed bacteria and blood into a toxic stew, sparking violent pelvic infections, fevered chills, and delirious fainting spells. Such queen's sickness left her bedridden, feverish, and racked with pain, sometimes for a week or more. Royal advisors tiptoed around her chamber, fearful that any sound might trigger an outburst of agony or provoke accusations of neglect, pain disguised as sovereign dignity. Fact number 15. Intimate intelligence. Even the most private phases of Elizabeth's body were exploited as state secrets. After each menstrual cycle, her soiled rags were collected by handmaidens and subjected to the scrutiny of her medical staff. Physicians examined the color, consistency, and odor, seeking signs of illness or, more alarmingly, proof of pregnancy. These intimate garments became classified intelligence, their analysis influencing diplomatic overtures and marriage negotiations. Thus, the Virgin Queen's furthest vulnerabilities were laid bare for political advantage, her humanity conscripted into the machinery of power. In this dreamlike recounting, the grandeur of Elizabeth's reign dissolves into a tapestry of suffering and silent horrors. Let your lids grow heavy, the lullaby of centuries-old whispers guiding you deeper into the next unsettling truths that lie in wait. Fact number 16. Scavenger's daughter. In the dim flicker of torchlight, the iron embrace of the scavenger's daughter would clamp a victim into a twisted frame, compressing the body until bones creaked beneath the pressure. Elizabeth herself sanctioned this device, devised during her father's reign, to extract confessions and study human suffering as though it were a curious experiment. After each session, court clerks delivered meticulous reports detailing how long the prisoner remained alive under the crushing grip, the pattern of breath, shallow gasps, or desperate gulps, and even the pitch of their screams. In hushed corridors, those documents were passed from hand to hand like macabre lullabies, cataloguing agony as a dark art. Fact number 17. Thumbscrew ordeal. When simple intimidation failed, Elizabeth ordered the use of the thumbscrew with cruel precision. She insisted that each rotation of the screw applied just enough torque to fracture bone gradually, prolonging torment rather than ending it swiftly. The victim's cries, captured in official transcripts, were read aloud in private chambers. She demanded that they remain fully conscious, to feel every incremental shift, every shard of pain. Instructed by her command, torturers marked their tools with notches, measuring the angle turned and correlating it with the victim's tolerance threshold. Thus, trauma was catalogued step by step, a bizarre ledger of human endurance and suffering penned for the Queen's perverse curiosity. Fact number 18. Witches' water test. Under Elizabeth's authority, accused witches were subjected to the so-called swimming trial. Bound with heavy stones and cast into rivers or ponds, they faced a grim paradox. Sinking meant innocence, but certain drowning, while floating condemned them as witches, ripe for the stake. Crowds gathered by the banks, sipping cider and cheering as frail bodies fought to stay afloat, their terror echoing in the chill air. If somehow they bobbed to the surface, executioners would haul them ashore, nodding to the Queen's decree, before igniting wicker pyres that crackled like unholy fireworks. What began as a legal ordeal became public spectacle, church bells drowned out by screams and the splash of condemned souls. Fact number 19. Pregnant under torture. Perhaps most horrifying was Elizabeth's endorsement of tormenting pregnant women. When midwives or informants identified an expectant mother among the accused, torturers were instructed to twist her fingers, crush her thumbs, or apply the scavenger's daughter, all while reminding her that each pang of agony could harm her unborn child. This psychological cruelty, weaponizing maternal instinct, forced many to confess to impossible crimes just to spare the fetus. The court physician's notes, transcribed in invisible ink, recount how some women collapsed, not from broken bones but from shattered hope, begging between sobs for mercy that never came. Fact number 20. Astrology over strategy. In matters of state, Elizabeth consulted John Dee's celestial charts and oracular counsels as if they were dispatches from her generals. He would pore over star charts for hours, identifying inauspicious alignments before critical treaties or military campaigns. A comet's arc or a lunar eclipse might postpone negotiations with France or halt a planned assault on Spanish ships, all because the heavens had whispered a warning. Diplomats learned to wait in velvet antechambers, uncertain whether their queen's strategic brilliance was grounded in earthly counsel or bound to the capricious movements of planets. Thus, England's fate ebbed and flowed with the rhythm of the stars, guided by conviction that divine portents outweighed mere human judgment. Fact number 21. Ominous portent. In a dusk-lit council chamber, Elizabeth watched as a lone raven soared backward above the palace turrets, a sight she interpreted as a dire omen. Convinced that the unnatural flight signalled catastrophe, she postponed all negotiations with Spain for 3 long weeks. Courtiers and foreign envoys, dressed in velvet cloaks and polished boots, found themselves shivering not from the autumn chill but from the Queen's resolute superstition. Messages were dispatched with urgent red seals, instructing Spanish ambassadors to await a more propitious moment. During that period, the air in Whitehall grew thick with tension and speculation. Would peace between two great powers falter forever? Or was this merely the whim of a monarch who saw meaning in every shadow and every backward flapping wing? Fact number 22. Royal flux. Beneath the draperies of state banquets lay a more uncomfortable reality. Elizabeth frequently lost control of her bowels after consuming imprudent amounts of wine and extravagant feasts. Courtiers whispered the term royal flux in hushed tones as they hastily concluded audiences when they sensed her discomfort. The knock of fatigue at her chamber door might mean the curtain fell on a public ceremony at any minute, leaving eager dignitaries scurrying from velvet-lined halls. Despite the embarrassment, the Queen insisted on pressing on with courtly duties, unwilling to let private affliction tarnish her image of unwavering sovereignty. Fact number 23. Diplomatic disgust. Many Western ambassadors, in coded correspondence to their homelands, lamented the assault on their senses within Elizabeth's reception rooms. Their dispatches spoke of a noxious blend, miasmas of waste seeping from icy stone floors, the coppery tang of lead-scented makeup on the air, and the cloying bouquet of decay. Even the most seasoned envoys found themselves wincing as they bowed, desperate to mask their rising nausea. Some resorted to discreet handkerchiefs over their noses. Others demanded meetings in the royal gardens, attributing their aversion to English damp or foreign air, while secretly fleeing the stench of death and rot that pervaded the court. Fact number 24. Disaster cleanup crew. To manage the frequent embarrassments of bodily functions and soiled garments, Elizabeth employed a specialized unit of attendants known as the Disaster Cleanup Crew. These stealthy servants trailed the Queen through her daily schedule, ready to whisk away any evidence of calamity, be it a stain of urine or splatter of excrement, often in the midst of grand assemblies. So grave was the penalty for revealing these intimate details that any servant caught speaking of such incidents faced immediate execution. And so, in the hush of velvet-lined corridors, a silent choreography unfolded as newly laundered shifts replaced soiled undergarments, preserving the illusion of regal perfection at all costs. Fact number 25. Amy Robsart's final fall. Perhaps most chilling was the death of Amy Robsart, wife of Elizabeth's childhood confidant Robert Dudley, found broken at the base of a staircase with her neck suspiciously fractured. Amy's demise might have been an unfortunate accident, yet Elizabeth's unruffled reaction fueled dark rumours. She greeted the news with calm composure, displaying no overt grief or surprise, as if she had foreseen the event. Whispers abounded in shadowed corners. Had the Queen orchestrated the tragedy to clear the path for her own romantic ambitions? Whether truth or elaborate conspiracy, Amy Robsart's untimely end remains one of the most enduring enigmas of the Tudor court. Fact number 26. Betrayal of first love. In the hush of royal chambers, Elizabeth once turned upon her own tender memories with chilling detachment. Thomas Seymour, her adolescent confidant and early suitor, had sheltered the young princess after her father's death. Yet when Seymour's ambitions cast him into suspicion of treason, Elizabeth, now queen, provided damning testimony against him. Her detailed accounts of their youthful intimacy, whispered conversations, and secret exchanges sealed his fate. Seymour's executioner's block was laid at her command, and the woman who once laughed beside him in childhood shadows stood aloof as the blade fell. The court watched in startled silence, realizing that even loyalty born of youth could be sacrificed upon her altar of power. Fact number 27. The cursed cleaving. The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, is cloaked in whispers of cruelty most unsettling. Elizabeth decreed a beheading with a blunted axe, ensuring her cousin's head would not part cleanly in a single stroke. Witnesses claimed Mary received 3 hacking blows before death finally came each one, drawing out her agony, staining the block with defiantly flowing life. In the gallery above, Elizabeth reportedly applauded the hesitant thuds, as though savouring a performance. What was meant to be a swift removal of a political rival transformed into a grotesque theatre of violence, choreographed by a sovereign who viewed mercy as weakness. Fact number 28. Scarlet superstition. Elizabeth's diet bore the mark of her deepest anxieties. She refused to eat anything crimson. Red meat, cherries, beets, even red wine were banished from her table, for she believed the colour invoked the terrors of her menstrual suffering and unspoken dread that scarlet within her system would exacerbate her pain. What began as precaution became obsession, isolating her from nourishing proteins and vital nutrients. Starvation of iron and essential vitamins aggravated her gaunt frame, and her skin paled further, the Queen of England shrinking within the walls she once filled with confident grace. Fact number 29. Pregnant prohibitions. Within the bustling chaos of Elizabeth's kitchens, no expectant mother was permitted to touch the Queen's food. Rumour held that the essence of pregnancy could infect a meal, transferring the common woman's condition to the sovereign herself. Cooks were routinely examined by royal midwives, and any hint of a child's life growing beneath a servant's heart resulted in immediate dismissal. Her station revoked, her apron stripped away. For the women forced from the hearth, the sting of rejection cut deeper than cold winter nights. Their bodies, capable of new life, deemed too perilous to feed the guardian of a crown that could never yield an heir. Fact number 30. Savage sustenance. Morning light found Elizabeth at her most barbaric. She demanded live roasted birds at breakfast, creatures plucked from their cages only moments before. Courtiers would gather in a tense semicircle, witnesses to her feral feast. With bare hands, she tore into quail and pheasant, flesh and sinew spilling between her fingers as she devoured each trembling morsel. The crackle of bone under her teeth and the flutter of dying wings echoed in the silent hall. Diplomats tried to maintain composed expressions, but many confessed in private letters to feeling they watched a wild carnivore rather than a cultured monarch. Fact number 31. The grotesque performance. As Elizabeth sat at the head of the long oak table, the hall fell into a hushed stillness. Courtiers, clad in velvet and satin, stood motionless in rigid lines, their eyes fixed upon the Queen's every bite. No one dared adjust a ruff or shift a weight from one foot to another, for to move was to risk incurring her icy wrath. Meanwhile, Elizabeth tore into roasted fowl with savage relish, juice and drippings cascading onto her gilded plate. The only sound was the crack of bones under her teeth, and the faint rustle of silk skirts. It was as though the banquet had become a macabre theatre, she, the lone actor, performing a feast of gluttony under the audience's silent, trembling gaze. In this grim spectacle, nourishment became an assertion of power, and the courtiers, watching like statues, bore witness to a display more chilling than any public execution. Fact number 32. Secret abortions. Whispers among Lady Mary Douglas and other distant confidants spoke of at least 2 clandestine abortions, desperate measures taken to conceal pregnancies conceived with Robert Dudley. Elizabeth sought the aid of midwives skilled in herbal concoctions, drops of hemlock, tinctures of pennyroyal, each dose laced with the hope of safe termination. Yet, one evening, after taking a blue-green draught under the guise of treating women's troubles, she collapsed into delirium, her throat constricted by spasms of poison. Her breathing grew shallow, and courtiers feared she would perish from her own attempt to remain the untarnished Virgin Queen. Though the midwives managed to counteract the worst of the toxins, Elizabeth's recovery was slow, marked by nights of fevered hallucinations and groans that echoed through the chamber, a painful reminder of the lengths to which she would go to guard her reputation. Fact number 33. Infanticide rumours. Even more unsettling is the rumour that Elizabeth may have gone so far as to end the lives of her own newborn children. A fragmentary letter from a shadowy physician hints at an unspoken necessity, leading to the removal of evidence most perilous. If the Queen did indeed bear an heir in secret, only to have that child quietly dispatched, then her devotion to maintaining the facade of perpetual virginity would have culminated in the most horrific of betrayals. Such an act would mark the darkest chapter in her reign, a mother extinguishing her own offspring to preserve an illusion that sustained her grip on the throne. Yet, in the hush of libraries and vaults, no official record confirms this atrocity, only the tremor of possibility that chills any who dare imagine it. Fact number 34. Animalistic domination. Paranoia seeped into Elizabeth's daily ritual, driving her to demand that certain servants crawl before her like beasts, hands and knees pressed to the cold stone floor, eyes cast downward as they approached her presence. She believed that keeping them on all fours prevented conspiracies and enforced humility, a living reminder of her supreme authority. Any servant caught standing upright bore the risk of brutal punishment. A swipe of her gloved hand, a savage kick, a jar of cold water to the face. This degradation transpired in the quiet moments between audiences, where the Queen's whispered orders turned human beings into crawling creatures subjects so subjugated that the line between royalty and animal blurred into a single terrifying reality. Fact number 35. Violent rages. Even those closest to her lived in constant fear of Elizabeth's unpredictable wrath. Her ladies-in-waiting, chosen for beauty and loyalty, found themselves on the receiving end of her fury. Faces left red from vicious slaps, ears wrung from strikes too powerful to register at once, arms scratched and torn by manic claws. On several occasions, she hurled delicate porcelain combs across the room or grabbed nearby gauntlets to whip unsuspecting attendants. One dame lost hearing in one ear after an especially violent encounter, her eardrum shattered by a forceful blow. The emotional toll was immeasurable. They moved through corridors with eyes averted, never certain whether a misplaced gaze or a whispered mistake would unleash the Queen's next outburst. And so the women of the court navigated a landscape of terror, where intimacy with a monarch could cost both body and spirit. Fact number 36. Shortened servant lifespans. In the soft hush of palace corridors, an unsettling pattern emerged. Elizabeth's personal servants lived markedly shorter lives than those in other noble households. A careful tally of household records revealed that many attendants succumbed to mysterious fevers, sudden collapses, or inexplicable ailments well before reaching middle age. Chronic stress, relentless cruelty, and exposure to the Queen's toxic environment ranging from lead-laced makeup to repeated bloodletting wore down their bodies. Some contracted infections after minor injuries sustained while rushing to serve her. Others developed digestive disorders from the unsanitary meals she forced them to taste. Over time, the court physicians came to speak in low tones of a royal attrition, a silent culling woven into the fabric of her reign, where English nobility itself seemed to wither in the shadow of a sovereign who valued power above all else. Fact number 37. Urine-tasting horror. Each morning, a trembling handmaid was summoned to Elizabeth's chambers for the most invasive of duties, sampling the Queen's urine. With a slender glass vial, the servant would draw a few drops, then hold her breath while the liquid's colour, clarity, and odour were scrutinized for signs of illness or poison. To decline was unthinkable, a refusal marked a path to the dungeon. Many handmaidens later reported recurrent infections, digestive upsets, and skin eruptions after this daily ordeal. Some fell so gravely ill that they were carried away, their uniforms stained with sickness. In the Queen's eyes, this ritual was an essential safeguard, Yet for those forced to partake, it became a cruel alchemy of suffering, blending medical paranoia with psychological terror. Fact number 38. Execution gallery. Not content with distant views, Elizabeth commissioned a private gallery at the Tower of London for her personal entertainment. Plush cushions lined the wooden benches where she reclined, attended by a select circle of ladies and gentlemen. Her attendants would bring trays of sweetmeats and spiced wine as she watched beheadings and hangings below. With an air of detached connoisseurship, she applauded each precise stroke of the executioner's axe, measured the distance between the prisoner's neck and blade, and reportedly muttered compliments on the grace of a clean cut. This calculated merging of refinement and brutality revealed a monarch who saw capital punishment not merely as justice, but as spectacle, and herself as its discerning critic. Fact number 39. Applause for Mary's death. When Mary, Queen of Scots, finally met her fate, the performance reached its peak. Elizabeth's entourage watched the proceedings from velvet-draped balconies as the executioner brought a dull axe down upon Mary's pale neck once, twice, 3 times, until the head fell. Witnesses later swore that Elizabeth raised her gloved hand in slow, deliberate applause after each blowing strike, as if she were at a theatrical performance rather than a royal execution. The echo of her clapping silenced the distant tolling of chapel bells. For many courtiers, the sound was a chilling confirmation. Mercy for a rival was never on Elizabeth's stage, only the savouring of retribution's final act. Fact number 40. Picnic of Pyre. Perhaps the most grotesque display of her reign occurred when Elizabeth brought her own repast to view the burning of heretics. She arrived at the stake with an embroidered reticule containing spiced breads and sweet wine, seated comfortably upon a carved oak bench. As pyres flared and tortured prayers turned to screams, she offered morsels to her companions, sipping leisurely while bodies curled in the flames. Guests recorded that she commented on the height of the flickering flames and the colour of the smoke, comparing it to potions in her apothecary. That day's picnic, with heat and horror mingling in the summer sky, blurred the line between judicial duty and monstrous revelry, leaving an image so horrifying that even time itself seems to recoil from its memory. Fact number 41. Sadistic laughter. In the dim glow of torchlight, Elizabeth would take her place on a low dais, while a prisoner's screams pierced the stillness below. Rather than recoil, she is said to have erupted in riotous laughter at each cry of agony, as though the torment were a jest performed solely for her amusement. Even the most seasoned torturers, hardened men accustomed to inflicting pain, would pause, startled by the Queen's gleeful reaction, their hands trembling on iron instruments. In those echoing chambers, suffering became a spectacle, and Elizabeth's laughter rang out like a sinister lullaby, turning human anguish into her own private comedy. Fact number 42. Venereal vector. Court whispers claimed that Elizabeth herself harboured the ravages of syphilis, and that her intimate liaisons unwittingly spread the disease among her closest confidants. Skin lesions, unchecked mood swings, and lapses in memory hinted that she suffered as both vector and victim. Gentlemen and ladies who drew near sharing whispers, embraces, or bedchamber confidences often fell prey to wasting fevers and disfiguring sores. Despite the hush of medical counsel, infection persisted as a hidden scourge within the gilded walls, a testament to the destructive power of passion mingled with the ignorance of her physicians. Fact number 43. Carnal court banquets. Dinner with Elizabeth could descend into a panorama of brutality. She seated herself at tables flanked by prisoners shackled to stakes, their tortured screams merging with the clatter of silver and fine porcelain. As she savoured venison pies and candied fruits, the distant clash of iron on flesh served as an unsettling accompaniment. Diplomats later described this sensory banquet as an event where delicate courses were paired with the symphony of agony, blood and bone, mingling with the aromas of spiced wines. For Elizabeth, the interplay of taste and torment seemed to enrich both her palate and her pleasure in power. Fact number 44. Restless slumber. Each night, Elizabeth vanished from her chambers without warning, slipping into a different suite, a different wing again, leaving her guards and advisors to scour the palace at dawn. This ritual, born of paranoia over assassination plots, created a labyrinth of secrecy through corridors where even her most trusted counselors dared not follow. Though it bolstered her security, it also deepened her isolation. She could never feel truly at home, for each night's refuge was unknown until morning light. Sleep became fragmented, dreams uneasy, and her mind drifted further into the shadows of suspicion. Fact number 45. Lethal tasting panel. Concerned by rumors of poisoning, Elizabeth maintained an elaborate food-tasting corps. Dozens of attendants who sampled every morsel destined for her table. From the first sprinkling of salt to the final swirl of sauce, each bite passed through multiple lips before it could reach Her Majesty. Many tasters fell ill or perished from spoiled meats or toxic mushrooms. A handful reportedly expired after chewing spoiled cheese laced with deadly fungi. Yet the Queen pressed on, indifferent to the deaths of her human sentinels, as if every life wagered in this grim gamble were a mere footnote to her continuing survival. Fact number 46. Wardrobe witch hunt. Each morning, Elizabeth's ladies-in-waiting arranged every garment from her wardrobe in careful rows, preparing for the Queen's ritual inspection. Elizabeth would examine each dress and cloak, under candlelight for hours on end, scanning seams for hidden runes, arcane stitches, or stray threads that might conceal a curse. A single misplaced knot or unusual symbol prompted immediate destruction. The gown would be doused in oil and set alight without a second thought. In her mind, a bewitched garment was tantamount to an assassination plot, and the flames that consumed her silk and velvet served as a fiery testament to her fear of unseen magic. In the glow of the bonfire, the ashes of haute couture whispered of paranoia woven into every stitch. Fact number 47. Royal doubles. To thwart would-be assassins, Elizabeth employed look-alikes female attendants chosen for their uncanny resemblance to the Queen. Clad in similar gowns, wigs, and jewellery, these doubles ventured into potentially dangerous situations, while the real monarch remained safely hidden. On at least 2 notorious occasions, an impostor was brutally murdered by an assassin who mistook her for Elizabeth, left beaten or strangled in a shadowed alley. Courtiers discovered the bodies days later, the attendants' identities betrayed only by a single ring bearing the Queen's crest. Meanwhile, Elizabeth moved through her public duties unaware, or perhaps unmoved, by the human shields she sacrificed to maintain her own survival. Fact number 48. Slow starvation. In the damp cells of the Tower of London, Lady Catherine Grey, the unfortunate cousin who dared marry for love, endured years of systematic starvation at Elizabeth's behest. Her daily rations were reduced to a meagre slice of bread and a small cup of water, then stripped away entirely on the Queen's orders. Servants whispered of Catherine's gaunt figure, her hollow cheeks, and the once bright sparkle in her eyes dimmed to vacant fear. This prolonged deprivation was a form of torture as deliberate as any rack or iron. A slow march toward death by hunger. Elizabeth's satisfaction lay in watching her own flesh and blood wither for daring to defy royal decree. Fact number 49. The secret child. In the spring of 1562, a swaddled infant appeared briefly at court too well dressed for a commoner, cared for by a hush-hush cadre of ladies. Rumours swirled that this mysterious child was Elizabeth's own daughter by Robert Dudley, hidden away to preserve her image as the Virgin Queen. The baby vanished as quickly as she arrived, whisked to a distant manor, or perhaps quietly executed, no one could say for certain. Noble gossip tingled with speculation that Elizabeth's unwavering devotion to chastity masked an even darker secret, a mother who sacrificed her own flesh and blood to safeguard political power. Fact number 50. Mercury addiction. Beyond the toxic paint on her face, Elizabeth developed a deep-seated dependence on mercury-based medicines. From tinctures for melancholia to salves for digestion, she consumed the heavy metal with religious fervour, convinced it was the elixir that preserved her vigour. Yet with each dose, her hands shook violently, her speech slurred, and her gait faltered. Physicians documented her tremors, her body quivering as though seized by an unseen force, yet she refused to relinquish the poisons she believed kept her alive. In the dim lamplight of her private chamber, Elizabeth's faith in her doctor's toxic brew chained her to a slow descent into neurological ruin, each remedy deepening the ravages it was meant to cure. Fact number 51. Shaking salvation. By the dim light of dawn, Elizabeth's hands trembled so violently that her silver goblet of spiced wine quivered in midair, sending droplets glinting on the tapestry below. Penmanship dissolved into scrawled chaos whenever she tried to sign a decree, each letter smearing like wet ink on parchment. Yet, Undeterred by mounting evidence of mercury-induced tremors, she clung to her toxic elixirs as if they were life's sole anchor. Courtiers whispered that without a fresh dose, she would falter entirely, but with each new draught of poisonous remedy, her spasms deepened. In the hush of her private chamber, she believed the same metal that ravaged her nerves was her salvation, a cruel paradox she never dared resolve. Fact number 52. Forgotten confidences. Conversations with Elizabeth could vanish as quickly as they began. One moment, she would deliberate a treaty's fine detail. The next, she would stare blankly ahead, the words lost to her mind. To compensate, her counselors adopted a ritual of immediate transcription scribes perched on stiff chairs, quills at the ready, ink racing across vellum as the Queen spoke. Without that urgent record-keeping, diplomatic accords would dissolve into confusion or outright chaos. Envoys left confused, treaties unsigned, alliances slipping through their grasp. So reliant was Elizabeth on these written echoes of her own speech that a single missed jot might undo weeks of brittle bargaining. Fact number 53. Mirror phobia. Mirrors, once prized for revealing her porcelain facade, became instruments of terror. Elizabeth ordered the removal of every looking-glass from her palaces, fearing they might steal her soul or serve as portals for enemy spies to peer into her secrets. Only one small hand mirror, under her direct guard, remained. Courtiers moved through echoing halls, lamps casting anxious shadows in rooms devoid of reflective surfaces. Tapestries and painted canvases replaced the gleam of glass, yet each step felt haunted by the absence of familiar images. For Elizabeth, to gaze on her own reflection was to court madness. Better to dwell in perpetual darkness than risk the mirror's whispered betrayals. Fact number 54. Elizabeth Screw. Not content with inherited instruments of torture, Elizabeth collaborated with her master torturers to design a new device, the Elizabeth Screw. This grim contraption featured multiple threaded screws intended not to snap bone outright, but to crush fingernails and fingertips in a protracted agony. The volution of each screw echoed like a sinister metronome, marking out seconds of torment as cartilage yielded and nerves screamed. Victims bound to wooden boards begged for swift death, but the Queen present for the unveiling watched with quiet fascination as the mechanism fulfilled her specifications. Excruciating pain without fatality, a living testament to her capacity for calculated cruelty. Fact number 55. Dining on torment. For Elizabeth, torture and cuisine merged into a single ritual of control. She orchestrated dinners where each course corresponded to a stage of interrogation. First, delicate hors d'oeuvre preluded whispered questioning. With the main course, instruments would be applied to flesh in an adjacent chamber. Dessert signaled the final extraction of a confession. Courtiers watched from hidden balconies, the clink of crystal and the splash of sauces punctuated by distant screams. Elizabeth praised the synergy of flavors and fears, viewing such events as living art, each scream a haunting accompaniment to wine-stained revelry. In her eyes, the true masterpiece was the seamless fusion of gastronomic delight and human suffering. Fact number 56. Genocidal campaign in Ireland. In the damp mist of Irish dawns, Elizabeth's commanders carried out orders so chilling that even seasoned soldiers trembled. Entire families were driven from their homesteads. Women and children herded into thatch-roofed cottages, only to be sealed inside and left to perish. Fields once green were sprayed with foul-smelling poisons, arsenic-laced pellets thrown into wells and streams, tainting the very water villagers relied upon. The elderly and the youngest perished first, their frail bodies succumbing to exhaustion and poisoning. This was no mere military operation, but a methodical extermination of innocents, a campaign of genocide cloaked in the authority of crown and country. Yet in Elizabeth's court, the bloodshed was rationalized as necessary for English security, a grim calculus that sacrificed entire communities to the cold logic of conquest. Fact number 57. Poison experimentation. Within the hidden dungeons beneath royal chambers, condemned prisoners were selected as unwitting subjects for Elizabeth's macabre research. Her torturers administered drops of venom gathered from obscure herbs, poisons refined from metals, and mixtures whose names were struck from official records. Every convulsion, every gasp for air, was meticulously recorded: time of onset, severity of cramps, duration of torment, moment of death. In neatly bound notebooks, scribes charted the progression of agony as if charting the trajectory of a star. Elizabeth perused these reports in candlelit sessions, her face inscrutable, gleaning insights into human vulnerability with the detachment of a scientist. Compassion had no place in these labs of suffering. Only the relentless pursuit of lethal precision remained. Fact number 58. Trophies of torture. Beyond written accounts, Elizabeth craved tangible reminders of her dominion over life and death. She amassed what one courtier called a cabinet of horrors cases filled with mementos of those who had suffered at her behest. Strands of hair, brittle and faded, once crowned the heads of men and women. Sharpened fingernails and fragmented teeth lay next to shards of bone. Each relic bore a label: name, date, method of dispatch. Displayed on ebony shelves in her private gallery, these tokens served as both trophies and teaching tools, a personalized museum of human fragility. In the quiet hours before sleep, she would walk among them, tracing the outlines of dried scalp with cold, curious fingers, as though stirring memories of her darkest triumphs. Fact number 59. Spoiled supper sacrifice. Paranoia over poisoning extended to the humblest offerings. Elizabeth required that her servants taste every scrap of leftovers fruit past its prime, stews left overnight, breads grown crusty with mold. The testers, pale with dread, chewed each morsel under her watchful gaze, willing their loyalty to stand between the queen and imagined betrayal. Countless attendants fell ill, some to septic wounds in their mouths from rotting food, others to unknown fevers that claimed them in silent nights. Elizabeth, sipping her fresh ale, regarded their misfortune as proof of her own invulnerability. In her court, the line between protection and cruelty blurred, as the lives of the lowliest servants were gambled in the game of sovereign security. Fact number 60. Fingers as Fortuna. Beyond the cabinet lay the most personal of macabre adornments, a necklace strung with the severed digits of executed traitors. Encased in delicate glass vials and suspended on a fine silver chain, the bony remnants of fingers served as charms, talismanic reminders of mortality and dominion. Elizabeth believed their presence warded off conspirators and ill will, each bone a conduit of power drawn from lives she had extinguished. As the heavy necklace rested against her throat, she felt shielded by the very victims of her edicts. In quiet reflection, her breath steady and eyes half closed, she listened to their silent testimony. A soft clink of glass on silver, echoing through the corridors of a throne built upon both reverence and terror. Fact number 61. Cannibalistic dentures. Even in matters of personal vanity, Elizabeth's cruelty found a grotesque outlet. She commissioned dentures crafted from the teeth of executed criminals. In secret workshops behind palace walls, artisans selected blackened molars and jagged incisors, cleaning and reshaping them into crude dental plates. When fitted into her mouth, these stolen teeth both concealed her own dental decay and served as a macabre emblem of her dominion. She literally consumed the remains of those she condemned. Each clench of her jaw was a reminder that her authority was unassailable, powered by the very remnants of her victims. In twilight hours, courtiers whispered of her ghostly smile, half human, half relic of death itself. Fact number 62. Beasts as test subjects. Not content with human suffering alone, Elizabeth turned her palace gardens into open-air laboratories for refining execution techniques. Dozens of small creatures, birds, rabbits, and even stray dogs were captured and subjected to trial runs of blades, strangling cords, and experimental toxins. With each trial, the Queen observed from her covered veranda, noting which methods produced the cleanest kill or the most efficient agony. The blood-stained grass and trampled flower beds bore silent witness to her relentless pursuit of perfected cruelty. Only after such practice on animals would similar instruments be deemed ready for human use, ensuring that the ultimate terror inflicted upon her prisoners was both reliable and exquisite in its precision. Fact number 63. Guinea pig prisoners. Deep beneath the Tower of London, in mortar-lined vaults, Elizabeth's condemned prisoners were transformed into living test subjects for a sinister array of poisons. From distilled plant alkaloids to mercury compounds, each dose was calibrated, administered, and recorded in painstaking detail. Her scribes charted every spasm, every laboured breath, every moment the light faded from a prisoner's eyes. In her private study, Elizabeth would review these logs like a scholar poring over a scientific treatise, each entry a chapter in the anatomy of suffering. The victims' deaths became data points in her relentless quest for infallible methods of assassination and torture, their agony catalogued for the Crown's secret archives. Fact number 64. Torture as literature. Beyond notes and charts, Elizabeth amassed a personal library of torture narratives, first-hand accounts, executioners' journals, and sketches of broken bodies. Bound in leather, stamped with her crest, these volumes detailed the cracking of bones, the tearing of flesh, and the crescendo of screams. She would retreat to her study at dusk, quill in hand, and devour these accounts, annotating them with marginalia, suggestions for deeper cuts, finer blades, or more prolonged pain. To her, each story was not tragedy, but art, an exploration of human endurance and vulnerability. The lines between reader and writer blurred as she became both chronicler and conductor of terror, her intellect shaped by the symphony of suffering. Fact number 65. Mirror banishment. At the height of her reign, Elizabeth decreed an obsessive expulsion of mirrors from every royal residence. Grand hallways and opulent chambers were left devoid of reflective surfaces. Windows and polished metals were shrouded in velvet drapes. Only a single slender hand mirror remained under her direct custody. Any servant or courtier caught displaying a personal looking-glass faced brutal retribution. Beatings, imprisonment, even exile. Elizabeth feared that reflections could harbour malevolent magic, stealing her soul, or serve as a spyglass for enchanters plotting her demise. In the resulting darkness, courtiers moved like shadows, never certain where she watched, as the absence of mirrors mirrored her own fractured psyche. Fact number 66. Mirror fury. In the hushed stillness before dawn, Elizabeth would occasionally dare to glance at her own reflection in the single-hand mirror she permitted. Such moments often ended in volcanic rage. She would hurl the glass against a stone wall, shards spraying like black petals across the floor. In her fury, she sometimes slashed her cheek against the sharp fragments, drawing blood that smeared across both her skin and the broken glass. It was as though she sought to destroy not only the mirror, but the very image of herself. It reflected a desperate act to obliterate any perceived traitor, real or imagined, hiding just behind her eyes. Fact number 67. The Irish Extermination Decree. Under the chilling mandate of spare none, Elizabeth ordered the wholesale massacre of Irish villagers on her crown's authority. Men, women and children were rounded up, their cottages burned, their fields salted to deny survivors any hope of return. Troops swept through hamlets with sword and pike, executing entire families in sight of their neighbours. Modern historians recognize this atrocity as an early act of genocide, a systematic attempt to erase a people and their culture under the guise of quelling rebellion. Yet in Elizabeth's court, it was recorded as a triumph of statecraft, a bitter testament to power wielded without conscience. Fact number 68. Rathlin Island Massacre. On a cold summer's eve in 1582, more than 600 souls, many of them women and children, sought refuge in the sea caves of Rathlin Island. English soldiers, acting on Elizabeth's orders, built bonfires at each cave entrance and chased the frightened families inside. The flames licked the stone walls until the air thickened with smoke and death. Those who fled into the surf were cut down by pikes. Few escaped. The island's silence afterward was as haunting as the screams that once echoed through its rocky inlets. This massacre remains one of the darkest chapters in the Tudor conquest of Ireland. Fact number 69. Poisoned wells. Beyond the blade and the flame, Elizabeth sanctioned the use of poison to terrorize entire communities. Hidden agents laced village wells, with toxic concoctions, arsenic-laced barley grain, or tainted animal fat, rendering the water undrinkable, and slowly killing those who dared sip. The agony was prolonged. Agonized villagers suffered cramps, fevers, and internal bleeding over days before succumbing. The poison did not discriminate. Infants, the elderly, and the infirm alike perished. Reports of these sinister tactics filtered back to London as mere footnotes in dispatches, but in Ireland they became whispered warnings that the very lifeblood of the land had been weaponized. Fact number 70. Innovations in torment. Elizabeth's penchant for cruelty extended to the invention of new instruments of suffering. Chief among them was the Elizabeth screw, a device designed to compress fingers and toes slowly, inflicting maximum pain without immediate death. Crafted of iron with multiple threaded shafts, it allowed torturers to adjust the pressure with surgical precision, extending each victim's screams for as long as the queen who commissioned it wished to listen. These innovations turned torture into a grim science, blending anatomical knowledge with sadistic creativity. In Elizabeth's court, the art of human agony reached new, chilling heights, her final legacy to those who dared cross her. Fact number 71. Sensory spectacle. On mist-laden evenings, Elizabeth transformed her dining hall into a grand stage for a multi-sensory feast. As courtiers sipped spiced punch and sampled gilded pastries, torches flared in adjacent chambers, where prisoners writhed under the rack's relentless pull. The queen reclined on plush cushions at the dais, her gaze drifting between fine silver platters and the tortured cries that echoed off stone walls. Each course coincided with a fresh crescendo of agony, first the crack of bones, then the hiss of heated irons, creating a macabre harmony of gastronomy and human suffering. The rich aromas of roasted pheasant and candied fruits mingled with the metallic tang of blood, and Elizabeth, eyes half-lidded, appeared to savour both equally. For her, this fusion of Epicurean delight and brutal theatre was the ultimate demonstration of royal power, to dine while wielding life and death as instruments of spectacle. Fact number 72. Feast amid the plague. When the dreaded plague swept through London in 1563, most rulers would have withdrawn to safety, not Elizabeth. As pallbearers carried the first bodies from Westminster's gates, she pressed on with lavish banquets and courtly receptions. Laughter mingled with coughing fits as nobles gathered in overcrowded chambers, the Queen's jewelled gown brushing against robes stained with early victims' blood. Advisors fell ill one by one, some collapsing at the foot of her throne, yet she persisted in her routine, convinced that interruption would signal weakness. By spring's end, scores of her retinue lay in plague pits, their names crossed off in ledger books, while Elizabeth moved serenely among the living and the dying, her indifference as lethal as the disease itself. Fact number 73. Venereal reign. Within the shadowed intimacy of her private apartments, Elizabeth fostered a sexual culture unchecked by restraint. Lovers came and went, liaisons were whispered in candle-lit alcoves. But as passion bloomed, so did the hidden scourge of syphilis. The Queen's own rumoured infection lesions on her skin, bouts of fever, trembling hands spread among courtiers who shared her bed or her confidences. Officials passed venereal wounds and secret letters in the dark, unaware how deeply the infection had seeped into the body politic. In courtyard whispers, her reign became synonymous with a disease that left its mark on flesh and reputation alike, forging a legacy stained by the very desires she indulged. Fact number 74. Corpse concocted cures. Elizabeth's physicians, bound by both superstition and ambition, prescribed the most grotesque of panaceas. Powders made from crushed human bones, elixirs spiked with dried blood, and venoms distilled from mummified remains imported from Egypt. The Queen, believing in the ancient art of corpse medicine, consumed these wretched brews with the conviction that they held the secret to longevity. Each sip carried the echo of death-preserved fragments of skull, chalky splinters of bone, and the paradox of ancient rulers' supposed vitality bottled in a single cup. By candlelight, Elizabeth would clutch the goblet as though drawing life from the past's decayed hands, a grim communion that blurred the line between healer and necromancer. Fact number 75. Bloodlust for youth. Beyond powders and potions, Elizabeth demanded fresh blood from the condemned as the ultimate restorative. Executioners collected the crimson life essence immediately after a prisoner's death, funneling it into glass vessels kept at her bedside. With solemn ceremony, she would sip the warm fluid, convinced it would rejuvenate her veins and return her cheeks to their once porcelain glow. Courtiers recoiled at the sight, but none dared protest. Each drop represented a line between life and death, sovereignty and savagery. In that chamber of midnight rituals, Elizabeth's own pulse mingled with the final heartbeat of her victims, a silent pact forging her power in the most visceral of embraces. Fact number 76. Child spies. In the deepest shadows of her court, Elizabeth sanctioned an abhorrent form of espionage. Girls as young as 10 were trained as body agents. Under the guise of chamber service, These children were instructed to seduce visiting dignitaries and high-ranking officials, gleaning whispered secrets amid forced intimacies. Their innocence was sacrificed to statecraft every stolen confidence recorded in ciphered dispatches bound for the Queen's private archives. For these young agents, the corridors of power became cages of exploitation, their childhood stolen in the name of intelligence. Fact number 77. Torture researcher. Behind closed doors, Elizabeth pored over the most minute torture reports. Anatomical sketches of torn flesh, charts of escalating pain thresholds, and verbatim transcripts of victims' final pleas. She demanded exhaustive detail: how the pulse fluttered after a third twist of the thumbscrew, the precise pitch of a scream when bone gave way, and the psychological breakdown that followed. These documents were not mere records but instruments of refinement, as she guided her court physicians to optimize each method for maximum efficacy. In candlelit study sessions, she dissected human agony as though it were a scholarly pursuit, unblinking in her quest to perfect the art of suffering. Fact number 78. Mercury crown. As her reign crested toward its twilight, Elizabeth's once lustrous hair fell away entirely, leaving her scalp raw and riddled with sores. Decades of lead-infused cosmetics and mercurial elixirs had ravaged her follicles and poisoned her skin. Forced to don layers of heavy wigs, some adorned with pearls and jewels, others simple silk wraps, she nevertheless could not mask the acrid stench of decay that clung to her head. Courtiers steered clear of her private audience chamber, eyes watering at the mingled odor of rot and chemical tang that rose each time she lifted her kerchief to greet them. Fact number 79. Toxic tumors. Beyond hair loss, Elizabeth's body betrayed her in grotesque growths. Bulging tumors sprouted along her arms, chest, and abdomen, nodules of diseased tissue that pulsed beneath her gowns. These malignancies, born of chronic metal poisoning, deformed her silhouette until even her most tailored attire strained at seams. Hidden beneath layers of silk, the tumors throbbed with each heartbeat, emitting a pungent, sour scent that outmatched any perfume she could apply. Yet, she wore her regal robes with unyielding pride, concealing her disfigurement as best she could, while the court whispered of the monstrous form hidden under her finery. Fact number 80. Conversations with ghosts. In the final chapters of her life, Elizabeth's mind slipped beyond the realm of the living. She would engage in long, animated dialogues with unseen companions, mourning ancestors, courting phantom lovers, or debating state affairs with figures no one else could perceive. Advisors and ladies-in-waiting stood by in hushed complicity, nodding or murmuring agreeable responses to avoid triggering her unpredictable fury. In those fragile moments, the Queen's chamber became an echo chamber of spectral voices, blurring the boundary between monarch and spectre, her final descent into a world where only she, and her invisible council, remained truly present. Fact number 81. The stench of death. When Elizabeth I finally breathed her last, those summoned to her bedside recoiled at the overpowering reek that emanated from her corpse. Years of lead and mercury impregnation, unchecked infections, and festering wounds had left her body a toxic cesspool. Undertakers and apothecaries worked through the night to defile her remains. First, washes of pungent vinegar and rosewater to strip away the worst odors. Then injections of preservative compounds dipped in pitch and camphor to firm her flesh. At dawn's light, a life-sized wax effigy was unveiled, clad in her regal robes and crowned with her ruby diadem. The public, expecting to mourn a serene monarch, instead beheld this convincing simulacrum, never suspecting that the real Elizabeth lay hidden beneath layers of squalor and decay. Fact number 82. The secret wax display. For her grand lying in state, crowds gathered beneath the vaulted ceilings of Westminster Abbey, murmuring reverent words before stepping past a glass case that held the wax likeness of the Virgin Queen. No invitation bore mention of the true corpse, which was entombed in secret recesses, guarded by miscarriage of records and sworn silence. Even church officials dared not speak of the hidden coffin, for to reveal the Queen's true state, her skin mottled, her flesh off-gassing the metal poisons of a lifetime, would have shattered the illusion of royal purity that underpinned her legend. Thus, a masterpiece of deception was enacted. The public witnessed Her Majesty's final form in wax, never realizing that history's heroine lay far more grotesque beneath the veneer of artifice. Fact number 83. Fatal mercy of Mercury. In the hush of court annals, there remains a record smeared and nearly illegible that hints at the cruel irony of Elizabeth's demise. The chemicals she once embraced as cures, especially mercury-based potions, accumulated in her tissues until they reached a fatal threshold. Her physicians, perhaps too loyal or too fearful to halt the regimen, continued administering the same remedies until her organs gave way. In her final collapse, she was consumed by the very elixirs she believed would preserve her. Thus, the Virgin Queen's end was not brought by foreign dagger or battlefield arrow, but by the slow, insidious work of her own medicinal delusions. Fact number 84. The royal cover-up. Moments after her death, courtiers and bishops conspired to ensure stability across the realm. Official proclamations declared Elizabeth's passing the result of natural decay, a gracious euphemism for death by old age. Physicians were sworn to attribute her collapse to the seasons of life, rather than to the poisons that ran through her veins. Sermons at St. Paul's Cathedral praised her longevity and wisdom, omitting mention of her final week's delirium or her body's unmentionable condition. In this carefully orchestrated concealment, the monarchy preserved its image. The glorious Virgin Queen departed serenely, leaving the realm untroubled by rumours of her tragic, toxic end. Fact number 85. Ashes of atrocity. Within the sanctity of her private chambers, a hidden cache once held the darkest trophies of her reign. Bound volumes of torture logs, letters confessing coerced crimes, delicate vials containing strands of hair and splintered nails from executed prisoners. The walls, papered in regal damask, bore shelves of grim souvenirs. Upon her death, the new regime deemed these relics too abhorrent to survive. In the dead of night, the king's agents set the chamber ablaze, smoke curling beneath door frames. As flickering flames consumed the leather bindings and charred bone fragments, the records of her cruelties vanished in a final act of erasure, leaving behind only whispered memories and the waxen mask that still gazes serenely upon a world unaware of its creator's ghastly truth. Fact number 86. Instruments of intimacy. In the hush of her private chambers, Elizabeth kept a chilling collection of torture instruments, branding irons, iron hooks, and specially forged pincers displayed like ornaments on velvet-lined racks. These tools were not relics of past judgments, but implements of amusement in her darkest hours. On nights when her court lay in uneasy slumber, she would summon a trembling maid or a nervous courtier to her bedside, ordering them to kneel before the iron hooks. The branding irons, heated to a searing glow, seared initials of loyalty onto flesh, leaving scars that told tales of both pain and royal favour. Pincers would twist away at skin, while the iron hooks suspended victims by their limbs, forcing them to dangle in grotesque poses. For Elizabeth, the line between pleasure and punishment blurred. These instruments became her personal playthings, a secret theatre in which power was measured in screams. Fact number 87. Crawling for mercy. Submission in Elizabeth's court was enforced literally. All who approached her presence were required to crawl on their hands and knees, their eyes cast downward. To stand upright within her radiance was to invite immediate disgrace. Those who dared rise to feel the cool marble floors suffered swift retribution slaps that echoed like thunder, kicks that sent them sprawling, or public lashings that left welts for all to see. This ritual of humiliation reduced noble courtiers to animalistic supplication, ensuring that every bow carried the weight of her absolute authority. In the corridors beyond her threshold, the shuffle of crawling feet became a constant reminder of how far human dignity could be bent beneath a monarch's whim. Fact number 88. Rags of power. Elizabeth's obsession with contamination extended to her wardrobe in the most paradoxical way. She feared that fresh garments might be poisoned, yet refused to change her clothes for months on end. A single gown, once pristine satin, now stained and fraying at the seams, became her daily armour. Its bodice hugged her torso with stubborn tightness, its skirts brushing stone floors in tattered whispers. The fabric accumulated sweat, perfume, and the dust of 100 audiences, moulding itself to her flesh as though fusing with her identity. Courtiers noted the irony. The queen who wielded the power to command armies would tremble at the sight of a new robe, yet endure the stench and decay of her own rags without complaint. Fact number 89. Lingered filth. Even the most intimate linens were subject to her paranoia. Elizabeth's undergarments and menstrual cloths were changed only when their integrity failed, when lace tore, or the fabric unraveled under strain. Otherwise, they remained against her skin for weeks, perhaps months, absorbing blood, sweat, and the odors of a body rarely washed. The result was a breeding ground for infection, persistent itching, blistering rashes, and a sour stench that clung to her body like a second skin. Ladies-in-waiting would discreetly fan her with scented pomanders to mask the smell, but no perfume could fully banish the fetid reminder that even a queen, in her pursuit of safety, could drift into squalor. Fact number 89. Enduring lingered linens. Elizabeth I maintained the belief that her undergarments and menstrual cloths posed a risk of poison rather than disease, so she refused to change them until they literally fell to tatters. For weeks, sometimes months, she wore the same linens pressed against her skin, despite the unmistakable stench that rose from fabric sodden with blood and perspiration. Chronic itching and raw sores became her constant companions, and the ladies-in-waiting could do little more than discreetly conceal the most offensive odors with small sachets of lavender. Yet the queen bore her discomfort in stoic silence, convinced that any fresh garment might harbor a fatal enchantment. Fact number 90. Insomniac's armor. In fear of assassination, Elizabeth slept fully clad in her protective breastplate and backpiece each night, the cold iron digging into her ribs and shoulders. Rest slipped away into punctuated dozes, her body never fully yielding to slumber as her mind remained vigilant against the slightest whisper or footstep. Night after night, exhaustion gathered in her bones, and chronic tension became the normal state of her muscles. By dawn, her courtiers found her eyes rimmed in darkness, the armor still strapped on, a living testament to her unceasing dread and the price of perpetual vigilance. Fact number 91. Mercurial tremors. Long after her visage had cracked and discolored, Elizabeth continued to ingest mercury-based medicines, certain they preserved her vitality even as they poisoned her. Her hands would tremble uncontrollably, making the simple act of lifting a teacup an ordeal fraught with spilled tea and crimson-stained fingertips. Yet she refused to abandon these remedies, convinced each dose prolonged her reign. Physicians recorded her shakes and stammers as mere side effects, but for the queen, the line between cure and curse blurred until her very nerves sang with unending vibration. Fact number 93. Forgotten words. Conversations in Elizabeth's presence were fleeting events, her memory so eroded that she might recount a treaty in full one moment, then stare blankly when reminded of its existence minutes later. To prevent diplomatic chaos, her secretaries sat at her side with quills poised, transcribing every syllable as quickly as she uttered it. Without these real-time records, crucial agreements would vanish like morning mist, leaving ambassadors bewildered and the kingdom's foreign policy in peril. In her court, ink-stained papyrus became the only reliable witness to her decrees. Fact number 93. Mirror banishment. Elizabeth's centuries-long dread of reflections peaked in a decree to remove every mirror from her palaces. Bronze bucklers, polished metal, and crystal-looking glasses, all were hidden or destroyed. Only one small hand mirror, under her direct guard, remained accessible. Anyone caught attempting to present another reflective surface faced immediate punishment, public floggings or banishment from court. In the resulting darkness, courtiers walked with bowed heads, uncertain of their own appearances, as the queen sought to shield herself from the perceived treachery of her own likeness. Fact number 94. The Elizabeth screw. In collaboration with her chief torturers, Elizabeth devised a new instrument of agony, a ridged iron screw with multiple threaded shafts designed to crush fingertips and toes incrementally. Each turn of the crank drove the metal deeper into flesh and bone, prolonging pain while keeping the victim alive. By adjusting the tension, torturers could orchestrate an unending symphony of suffering. The queen reviewed prototypes in her private chambers, marking preferences for finer teeth on the gears and crisper notches on the screw, thus perfecting her design for maximum torment without fatality. Fact number 95. Culinary crucible. For Elizabeth, dining and torture formed an inseparable duet. She arranged feasts where exquisite dishes were served between brutal interrogations. First a course of rosewater-infused pastries, then the crack of bones under the rack, followed by a platter of spiced venison and the hiss of heated irons. Courtiers watched in horrified fascination as each scream complemented the flavors on their tongues, transforming the banquet hall into a multi-sensory gallery where Epicurean artistry met human agony. To the Queen, this orchestration of taste and terror was the consummate expression of her sovereign will. Fact number 96. Child body agents. In the dimly lit corridors of her palace, Elizabeth pressed children as young as 10 into service as body agents. Under the guise of chambermaids or page boys, these unknowing spies were trained to seduce visiting dignitaries, extracting whispered political confidences in the shadows of her private chambers. Their innocence was stripped away by forced intimacy, as courtiers and foreign envoys confided in them between stolen glances. Reports were relayed in secret dispatches to the Queen's inner circle, each young agent's heart heavy with fear. What began as an intelligence-gathering tactic became a legal facade for human trafficking, sanctioned by the highest authority in the realm. These child operatives lived in constant terror, aware that a single misstep could result in punishment or disappearance, their childhood sacrificed at the altar of state security. Fact number 97. Prisoner poison trials. Beneath the Tower of London, in vaults sealed from daylight, Elizabeth conducted her most sinister experiments. Dozens of condemned prisoners were forced to swallow vials of unknown poisons, ranging from distilled plant toxins to heavy metal concoctions, while scribes recorded every convulsive spasm and heart-rending scream. Each death was timed with a precision that would impress any surgeon, each symptom meticulously catalogued in leather-bound journals. Elizabeth reviewed these gruesome findings by candlelight, refining her recipes for silent assassinations and overt tortures alike. For her, the suffering of these unwilling guinea pigs was data clinical, objective, and crucial for perfecting methods that could be deployed against both traitors and rivals. In this subterranean laboratory, human life was reduced to a mere variable in her relentless pursuit of power. Fact number 98. Trophies of torment. In a hidden alcove of her private gallery, Elizabeth displayed a disturbing collection of personal spoils. Strands of prison hair, jagged fingernails torn from tortured limbs, and broken teeth pried free with pincers. Each relic bore a small brass plaque engraved with the victim's name, crime, and date of demise. These morbid artifacts were arranged like a macabre museum shelves lined with glass jars containing bone fragments, cabinets filled with scorched cloth from the rack. The Queen would stroll among them in solitude, tracing the contours of hardened blood clots with a gloved finger, as though inspecting fine porcelain. This private cabinet of horrors stood as both testament and trophy, a chilling reminder that her reign was built on a foundation of fear and suffering. Fact number 99. Spoiled supper sacrifice. Even the simplest meal at court bore the mark of Elizabeth's paranoia. Servants were compelled to taste every morsel of leftover food, rotten fruits, mold-encrusted loaves, and stale meat before the plates could be cleared. These poor souls, forced to swallow decay, often fell ill with bacterial infections so severe they died within days. Yet Elizabeth regarded their sacrifice as necessary proof of her own safety. If no tester perished, her supper was deemed free of poison. The palace kitchens thus became a grim theatre of survival, where loyalty was measured in willingness to risk life and limb for a single bite. This practice, both cruel and nonsensical, underscored the twisted lengths to which the Virgin Queen would go to protect herself from imagined threats. And so, as we gently close the final chapter on the life of Elizabeth, no longer the fierce monarch of legend, but a deeply human soul ensnared by fear, vanity, and the corrosive power of secrecy, let us take a moment to drift away from the harsh glare of torchlight and the echo of distant screams. Imagine now the hush of a quiet chamber, where the only sound is the soft rustle of silk curtains stirred by a midnight breeze, carrying with it the faint scent of rosewater and lavender, soothing the mind and quieting the heart. In the stillness that follows such darkness, we find the true message of this tale. That unchecked power, however tempting, can so easily twist compassion into cruelty, and that even the greatest among us remain vulnerable to our deepest fears. Yet within that same vulnerability lies the seed of empathy, that recognition that no crown, no matter how jeweled, can protect us from the frailties of the human condition. It is a reminder that kindness, honesty, and the courage to face our own reflections honestly are the most enduring legacies we can leave behind. As the images of blood-red hallways and torches fading into shadow melt away, let your thoughts settle on softer things. The laughter of children, the warmth of a gentle embrace, the quiet comfort of knowing we need not carry terror in our hearts. Allow your breathing to deepen, each exhale releasing the weight of darker stories, each inhale welcoming the lightness of peace. May you rest now in the knowledge that history's harshest truths can give way to the gentle truths of mercy and understanding, and that in the soft glow of dawn, a new day brings with it the promise of renewal and hope. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows. If you found these stories moving, I invite you to subscribe so we can continue to explore the rich tapestry of our past, both its light and its dark, with curiosity and care. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with warmth rather than fear. Good night. And remember, the gentlest power of all is the kindness we show one another. Good night.